Well, Damon, thanks so much for taking time to hang with us today. It's great to be with you.
All right. Thank you, David. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so interesting about the way that you brand yourself, that you communicate what you're doing in the world, is describing yourself as both an artist and a theologian. And so I want to hear, what does that mean to be an artist and a theologian? What does it mean when those two worlds kind of combine or overlap?
For me, I'm treading my own path here and trying to figure this out kind of as I go. But as I've told you before, I have a background of training in theology. I have a PhD in interdisciplinary studies using art, visual arts, theology, and really looking at a discipline called theological aesthetics. And that involves a lot of creativity theory, um, study of signs and symbols, and just really how the experience of the beautiful is a spiritual experience, and how those connect, and how do we intersect that with the arts. Because a lot of people have what we can call spiritual experiences from viewing works of art. I mean, it's a common thing. So how does all that come together? And so part of my research, when I do more of the research type stuff, is around how those intersections happens and what happens within us when we have these experiences, because they are spiritual experiences. Um, so that's what I'm trying to do.
I love that. That's beautiful. Can you give me an example of, and people that have had this experience will be like, yeah, Dave, I don't know why you're asking him this question, but I like to ask questions that are just like so basic sometimes because there are listeners, including me, who go, I want to hear what this means to you, such as having a spiritual experience when you are viewing or interacting or engaging with a piece of art. Give me an example of how that's happened in your own life.
For me, I think one of the best examples is just my favorite artist. His name is Aaron Douglas, and I really have always liked his work. And I started really researching some of the pieces that he was creating and really getting into his work. And there were just a few images that I actually finally saw in person. I happened to be in New York, and I was like, "Oh, this is where some of the places where these images are that I haven't seen." And I actually went and saw them in person. And after reading all about him and studying him and looking at these images and slides and even talking about them, dissecting them. I've got a couple of different articles and journals that I've talked about his work and the theological implications of his work, and actually seeing it, it was completely uplifting. I guess what in theological social we would say was an anagogic experience, and that means that it was an uplifting experience. I really felt a connection to the divine and that which was higher through these works, and really seeing them in person, because slides and all that stuff, they never really do justice. You got to go to the museum. You got to go really look at some art.
Yeah, yeah. I think I had that experience in 2000 when I went to see the exhibit of Andy Warhol at MoCA in LA. And I had been interested in his work. I don't know if I've ever really looked at it from a spiritual or theological perspective, but I was just in awe of these huge, huge canvases, and seeing the vast, how prolific his work was. It definitely left me feeling inspired when I left. Um, Talk to me about your own journey of consciousness, mindfulness, spirituality. Did you grow up with some sort of faith in your home, or did that emerge later for you?
No, not really. My parents, my mother always considered herself spiritual, but we didn't really go to church or anything like that. Um, and then as I got older, I always felt like I was a little boy. There was something I was supposed to do. Wasn't quite sure what it was, but I just felt like there was something I'm supposed to do. And in the course of growing up, um, really just trying to figure out what that was. And I always had this inkling, this penchant towards the spiritual. I did a lot of reading, a lot of philosophy and other things like that that I was just reading on my own just because. As a young man, as even in high school and college, and I went to a Catholic boys' school for high school and really got into the religion classes. And a lot of people weren't taking that seriously, but I was, and began to cultivate that connection. Then I got called into the ministry, literally called. I got involved with a church and got called into the ministry, and really struggled with that because I had this whole life that I was developing as an artist. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, these seem to be very different, but I had this underlying feeling that there is a connection. Um, and so I wanted to explore that and just kept pursuing it. And as I began to grow, I felt like the container of Christianity was too small. It was no longer. It's a good place to start. I think any type of religious practices are a good place to start, but that's not a place to stay. It's a place to begin. And as we expand in our spirituality, our understanding, then we need to go beyond those containers. So that's kind of what I did. And getting into other practices, started meditating, all these other things, and it just kind of took a life of its own.
At what point did you start to feel like, okay, this is feeling constrained for me? I have this like desire to do what? Like, what was it that, where there's a certain moment or was it an unfolding? How did that play out for you?
It wasn't unfolding because my constant struggle was figuring out how do I balance these two uh, things: this being an artist and being at that point I was in training to be a pastor, and I spent some time as a pastor. Um, but these feelings that I'm getting when I'm creating are the same feelings that I'm having when I'm in worship. So there's a connection here. I just need to figure out what that connection is and how it works. So maybe they aren't as different as I thought. But then when we really look at the arts and religion, you can't have a successful religious experience without the arts. You could have the arts without religion, but you can't have religion without the arts, whether it's music, whether it's poetry, whether it's, imagery, it's all there. So they kind of go hand in hand anyway, but I wasn't seeing those connections till I began studying these things. And so that's where the connection really lies. And this connection to the noumenal, to that which is beyond us, art can bring us there. The use of metaphor and symbol can bring us there. Meditation, prayer can bring us there. And so all these things coming together creates this experience. And that's really what you're doing. And even in the religious experience, part of that is the whole idea of attunement, where the group is becoming attuned in the process of worship. So how do we just do that on our own? That makes sense.
Hmm. Did you grow up as kind of that super creative kid that was always, creating something in terms of art, or like, tell me about that part of your life?
Um, I was always really into drawing, and I always wanted to draw, and that was pretty much the only thing I did. There was some opportunities for me to get into some gifted art programs, but unfortunately, we didn't have the money for me to participate in those, so I was kind of very limited. Then when I got to high school, I spent most of my time between the band room and the art room. So I knew that I wanted to be creative, but I just wasn't sure what was the proper venue. And when I had to start making decisions about college, I was like, well, you know what? The only thing I was a good musician, but I was never going to be a great musician. I was one of those people, you give me the music, I can practice, great, it sounds great, but I didn't have that passion for it. Whereas the art, I really had the passion for the painting and the drawing. And so one of my art teachers there, he really helped me develop a small little portfolio. And I actually got into the Kansas City Art Institute. And then that was pretty much it, off and running. And yeah, this has just been a part of my life always. I wasn't super creative, but definitely always creative. And I've realized that that's just what I do. I'm a creative person. In some kind of way, I'm always trying to create, construct. So I'm a builder too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Was there a pivotal moment where you started to have that aha of, oh, wow, my art and my spirituality, they can be together, they can be integrated? Was there some moment of aha or a person that helped you with that?
Um, I think it's more of an unfolding, just
Hmm.
as
Over
enlightenment is
time.
really unfolding. Yes, we think of enlightenment as something you arrive at, you get there, but it's not. It's an unfolding and it's an ever
Yes.
deepening. So there are different levels of enlightenment, actually. And the same thing with this. It was kind of different levels. And I got to a point where I need to put these together. The voice inside me is saying, you got to put these together. This, one or the other, doing this or that, it just won't work. It's too taxing on you. And so I just kind of branched out and said, I'm going to try this. And
Hmm.
it worked. I figured out my own way of working, my own way to integrate these two. And it worked out. So far, it's working out.
Beautiful. On your website, you write that your mission is to, quote, give divine light form through the manifestation of images that encourage reflection upon the myriad of ways spirit reveals itself within our world. I'm going to read that again. And if you could elaborate on this for us, that would be great. Your mission is to give divine light form through the manifestation of images that encourage reflection upon the myriad ways spirit reveals itself within our world. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it took me a long time to craft that because I wanted to be very precise about what I was trying to say, but I also wanted to be succinct. Um, Creativity necessitates form. If you say that you're creating something and there's no form, then you haven't created anything. Now, can that form to some degree be in terms of thoughts? Yes, but at some point it has to take a more concrete manifestation, or it's not creativity. And so that's how the divine works through us. It creates in form in this 3D world. We are in form, and so I am mirroring that and mimicking that and co-creating with the divine. I believe through this creation, my creations into form. And this happens in myriad ways. I mean, you walk around and we're getting divine downloads all the time. Spirit never stops speaking. The question is, are we in tune at that given moment to receive the message and recognize the symbols that are being presented to us? So all these myriad ways, I want to be able to get people to look at my images and stop and reflect and say, hey, how does this apply in my own life? Or I can relate to this feeling or this idea. And Spirit enters our world. And that's what I want my work to do. I want a reaction. Whether you end up saying, I don't like it, that's okay too. But there's a reaction. It made you stop and reflect, at least for a minute, about this whole idea and these principles. So that's basically what I'm doing. I try to really imbue my images with a lot of high vibrational energy during my process. So that's what I'm doing.
Hmm. Walk me through the artistic process from beginning to end, from the concept, like something comes in your head, you're having a download. How is meditation or prayer involved in the process? I mean, I just want to hear how you uniquely express yourself.
Um, Well, that old saying in the Bible of working out your own soul salvation is kind of what I'm doing. A lot of things that come to me are things that come to me during my own spiritual practice or doing me trying to understand things that are happening in my life and what is the theological spiritual significance of those things that are going on. So I'm really kind of doing a visual journal or diary of what's going on within my own self. Sounds very selfish, but I believe that we can find the universal within the particular. And so the particular is my individual creation, which hopefully leads you to the universal experience that we all have with spirit. And so I'll get something that I'm working on. A lot of times I'm reading some spiritual text or reading some kind of spiritual ideas. I'm really big on Joe Dispenza right now. So I've been reading quite a few of his books and trying some of those exercises. And that's leading me to some other things. And so I'm saying, okay, how could this be expressed visually? How could this experience or this feeling be expressed visually? What would it look like? For instance, I mean, we could do love. I could spend my whole life just on love. What does love look like? And that could be any myriad ways that I could spend extractly, exactly, precisely, so I could just do that, but that would probably get boring. So what would that look like visually for me right now? And so I began to do some sketching. I may go on Google Images and just look at some things, just kind of see, okay, what's kind of sparking my attention. I'll start doing some more sketches. I usually do small sketches, maybe about 4x4, 4x6, something like that. Then when I get those worked out, I'll begin still meditating, praying on the process. Then I may let it sit for a couple of days as I meditate and pray on it. Then I'll come back, I'll do some more tweaking, and I'll narrow those. Maybe I might do 8 to 10 images. I'll narrow those down to maybe three. Okay, these are three that I'm really feeling. What elements from the others I want to put in? I'll pray about that. I always pray and meditate before I sit down to work. And then I start laying out the canvas or laying out the paper once I get everything worked out. If it's going to be watercolor, it would be on paper, canvas. Sometimes I paint on board a lot with acrylic. Getting that worked out, then I start praying and meditating for a couple of days on how this is going to go. Usually, when I'm working, I sit down and meditate for 10 minutes before I start working, and I usually put on some binaural beats or some other kind of spiritual music that I might want to be listening to really keep me tuned in, honed in, and kind of really praying through my process. And I feel like it's a form of channeling. I feel like that's what I'm trying to do, particularly when I'm trying to put these higher vibrations into my work. So I need to stay tuned in and to be able to do that. And that's really what the process is until the image is finished. Most of my work that are series, I didn't know they were going to be series. My whole process is very intuitive. I may get something I'm working on, and then I'll think, okay, well, that's cool. And then Spirit will say, okay, we got another one. And I'm like, oh, there's another one. And so that'll go till Spirit says, okay, we're done. We're not doing it anymore. I'm like, okay, well, I guess this was a series. So I never really know. Um, And that's part of the fun of the process too.
How do you choose the particular medium that you're going to use once that idea starts formulating? Do you just have a deep knowing of the medium, or how does that unfold for you?
For me, once I get the sketches done, and they're all loose, rough sketches, and then when I get down to two or three, I do very tight, clean sketches. And once I start getting those very tight, detailed sketches, then I have an idea of how I want it to look. And then based upon the three mediums I use, acrylic, watercolor, or scratchboard, a medium called scratchboard, I can then discern which medium is going to best reflect the look that I want it to have and the feeling that I want it to emit. The scratchboard is very powerful because it's only black and white. Excuse me. And so, if I really want that kind of jump at you, really stark kind of contrast, then I'll usually use the scratchboard. If I want some things that are more subtle, I will probably do the watercolor. If I want something that's going to be really impactful with the color really bright, then I usually do acrylic. But the image kind of tells me what it wants me to do.
For people who may not be familiar with Scratchboard, describe what it is and how you utilize it.
Well, there's two types. There's a type that you can buy that's pre-blackened, and there's a type that you can buy that's just not. I prefer to blacken it myself, but it's basically a white clay board with clay on the top, and you can coat it with ink and then scratch the image back out. So it's a reverse process from drawing because when you're drawing, you're adding dark and contour. With this, you're pulling it out. So I black over the page and then I begin to use little scratching tools, different exactos, other things to scratch the image back out. It's very labor intensive, but the results are very strong.
And if you scratch something that you feel like, oh man, this did not go the way that I wanted to, can you re-ink it, or are you kind of stuck with it?
If it's a small area, I've developed some little techniques sometimes that you can kind of do some things to kind of change it up. But if it's a really big mess up, then yeah, you got to start over. That's it. Just the way it works.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. One of the things that you mentioned early in our conversation was the use of symbols, and I see that a lot in your work. What are I guess, why would you use symbols? And what are some of the key symbols that you have used uh, over and over again?
Symbols are an essential part of the discernment process, I think, for our spirituality. God speaks through us through symbols. The question is, how do we understand and interpret them? Spirit speaks through the symbolic, through metaphor, through these other things. So I find them to be very powerful ways to convey a lot of different information in a very succinct manner because one symbol can have very meanings. A small thing like a sign only has one dimension. Stop, that's it. But if you put three or four signs together, then you create a symbol. Symbol has can have a multitude of meanings, just like, for instance, and this might not be the best example, that's what I'm thinking of, the swastika. I mean, you've seen that in African Dogon culture painted on the sides of the wall. In that culture, it means something completely different than when you would see it in Germany in connection with the Jews. But there are all these different meanings packed into that. One of the symbols that I use a lot is the lotus. And so that's a very potent symbol. Most people understand that it can be enlightenment, it can be rebirth, it can be renewal, it can be this idea of beauty coming through from adversity, since the lotus grows up out of the mud, out of the dirt. And so you get all these different meanings that you can people who understand those symbols can understand from that one thing. So you get a lot of bang for your buck with these symbols. And most of us in our spiritual life is interpreting the signs. The signs are there all the time. The question is, are you tuned in? Are you paying attention to the sign? Go this way. Don't go that way. Oh, you're trying to force this. That's why it's not working out. That's a sign. Maybe I should try to back off a little while. All these things happen. So I think that is a good way of co-creating with spirit, is to be aware of these symbols and signs as they appear in our life. So I try to use them in my work to help remind us of that.
Hmm. If somebody is not familiar with signs, like for instance, I'm looking at some of your work right now as we scroll, and there might be symbols in these pieces that I go, oh, that's obviously a symbol. It probably means something, but I don't know what it means. How do I how do I go from there? Like, do I like take a picture of it, do a reverse image search, ask somebody? You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to even learn how to interact with your art with symbols that I might not be familiar with. What is your suggestion?
Oh, well, that goes back to my mission statement encouraging people to reflect. So thank you. You're reflecting. Yes, you could do a reverse image search. You could talk to the artist myself. One of the things that I do to help people with the exact thing that you're talking about is I always do. I have a YouTube channel. Every piece that I create, I do a YouTube video talking about the piece, showing the piece, breaking down the symbols, the symbology behind it, why I created, my inspiration, etc. I also have a blog that I create with the piece, and they're not always the same because the YouTube videos kind of just we don't want to say kind of off the top of the head, whereas the blog I really think it through in the writing it, so it's a little bit more precise. But generally, the things are going to be pretty much the same overall. So I try to help people with that. You can talk to me, the artist, any of the above. But what does it mean to you? What is it saying to you? Because a lot of times when I put symbols in certain places, what is that? What feeling does it evoke from you? Because I'm trying to do one thing, but we often, I think, as artists, do more than we can say. Because once you put that image out into the world, it takes on a life of its own. People have told me they saw things in pieces, and I was like, well, that was so far from where. But I'm glad it works for you. Not necessarily in a bad way, but just they see it takes on a life of its own, and that's what I wanted to do. And the good work should do that, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. I can't wait for people to see your work in the article. If you're watching this or reading this, be sure to go to awakenmagazine.com and find our conversation here because we're embedding some images of Damon's in the article. But also, of course, you'll go to his website, damonpowell.com, and we'll mention that and put that in the show notes. But just wonderful images in watercolor, in acrylic, and then the scratchboard. I'm really drawn to the scratchboard. The how stark you said, it is, and I'm not looking at it up close. I'm looking at a small image, but how detailed it is as well. Um,
Yeah.
so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the person who's willing to ask the questions out of ignorance. So, because I want to learn, So, one of the things that I notice in your work, you often portray individuals who are African American in their bodies are very muscular, I would say, and there's something that you're trying to portray through the style in which you are portraying the bodies. I assume. And they're really amazing images, oftentimes in yoga poses. And so, talk to me about that. Talk to me about the portrayal, the way that you're making your choices in the way that you're portraying the bodies of the individuals in your work.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things going on with that. If we go to my early background, I did a lot of drawing. I was engrossed in comic books. And so a lot of those figures have that kind of very muscular, very over. And so I did a
Yes.
lot of drawing that from when I was growing up. But I also think, in terms of the spiritual sense, I'm trying to create this idea of a more spiritual being. And a lot of it has to do with us having perfect bodies. We don't have them now, but optimally, I would think if you were really to be enlightened or become that way, your body would also change to its what do you want to say? Its utmost capability. And so I want to give that look about this is another aspect of us being spiritual beings is that our bodies are working optimally, if that makes sense. So that's really kind of what that's about. And then just me having that style. Um, I like to play with the figure a little bit, and then nothing's ever really exact. I don't take a lot of long leaps with the figure, but things are not exactly always in proportion either. I just kind of play around a little bit for exaggeration, just to make a point on certain things. Um, but yeah, I want everybody to kind of be more fit to kind of portray that aspect more of the spiritual dimension, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the images that I definitely want to embed in our conversation, if it's okay with you, is the anointing. And this picture of, well, you described, do you remember that image? The woman who's
Yes,
holding the ball over the top of her head. Can you describe that? What you were going for in terms of the portrayal of her?
yes, and actually, that image is a coffee table. I was actually it's actually on a coffee table that I use as my altar now. I've got some uh, crystals on there. I've got my water bowl on there. I've got my tuning fork sitting on there, and that's now my altar that I meditate at. And I'll make sure I send you a picture of that image. But really, it's this whole idea. I've been playing around a lot lately with this idea of the anointing. And you look at from a Christian biblical perspective, the anointing was this whole idea of the spirit of the divine coming down upon an individual to give them certain, for lack of better terms, we'll say, quote unquote, supernatural abilities for the benefit of the community, not for themselves, but for the benefit of the community, always to benefit others. And this whole idea of this inpouring into the person. And I believe that I wanted to really see what that looked like visually and how that felt like. Because I often feel that in my own meditation practice. I know sometimes at the end of my practice, I do that kind of in-gathering moment to bring the energy down into the body. And so I wanted to portray that. And that when you see the arms are very long, that's way longer than the arms really are on anybody. But I wanted to make that whole idea of this gathering of the energy and bringing it in, bringing it down, and this anointing that we receive when we're quiet and we're silent and we just allow spirit to move. We do receive this energizing, this uh, connection, this, if you want to say, opening to that which is higher. And so that's what that image is about. Particularly, you see the purple image, purple orb at the top, symbolizing purple is always a color for the spiritual. If you don't know that, I use a lot of color symbolism with my colors too. So colors, purple is always a symbolism for spiritual. And so this spiritual energy coming down, and also the crown chakra. So playing around with these images, multiple ones, the symbol having multiple meanings once again that you can relate to, and bringing that spiritual energy down into the body. Um, so that's what that image is about. And like I said, it's a coffee table, so that's on the top, and I fixed it very well so nothing moves. Um, but yeah, that's what it is.
And there's this pouring down. I don't know if it almost looks like oil that's coming down kind of onto the top of her head, or some sense of
Yes.
power. The
Mm-hmm.
arms are just so amazing. Yeah, that is quite an amazing piece. Um, hmm. Talk to me about your series with yoga poses. There are quite a few. What was the inspiration behind this? And yeah, tell us more about that series.
Well, I started doing Tai Chi in the early 90s, and then I would go in and out with Tai Chi. And then I had a partner who got me into yoga, and I really started getting into that. So I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I'll do a little Tai Chi for a few months, and I do some yoga for a few months. But I really started really getting, at one point, I was really into yoga, and I was really going and consistent in my practice. And a lot of things were opening up for me spiritually because of the practice, and clearing things from my body that need to be cleared just in terms of my own psychological stuff. You know, we store a lot of energy and emotion in our body. And I wanted to give some kind of tribute to that. And I think the whole thing with yoga is that the whole thing about the asana, the pose, is only mentioned very minimally in the Yoga Sutras. That's the very, just like, not even really a part of it. And I think a lot of our modern yoga doesn't, it's not as respectful of that as I feel it should be, because that should be the primary reason. My reason for doing yoga is part of my spiritual practice, not for workout, it's not for anything else. And so I wanted to kind of visually make that connection between what you're doing physically and what should hopefully be happening for you spiritually, internally, as a result of the yoga. So you'll notice that each of the images has what is called a unilome in there, and that's just a reminder. Yeah, the spirit, the physical is there, the pose, the asana, but there's also this spiritual dimension. You can't get one without the other, you know. And so really making that connection. And I had no idea that was going to be a series either, but I had some friend of mine who are yoga instructors, and I was like, why don't you all sit for me? I want to do some shots, and I'll just take a bunch of shots, and you all give me your five favorite poses, and I'll just try to play around with them. And then it just kept coming forth. So that's my largest series. I've got 15 watercolors of those, which is about three for each yogi that I took took shots of. And then they asked me to come and do some live painting at some of their events. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So now I've got like eight large format acrylics that I did that I live, at least started as live paintings at some of the yoga events. So that's what that is. I'm yogaed out now. we'll be no more younger for a while, unless Spirit says otherwise. But I think we're moving on to some other things. I'm really into dreams right now, and this whole idea of the symbolism and what can happen through dreams, how Spirit speaks to us through the dream world, the dream state. So I got a feeling that's kind of going to go for a little while. I've done one image, I've got another one I'm starting, and I think there's going to be at least one more, but we're waiting to see.
What are the have you already started with the dreams? Have you already started creating, or is it in more of a germination phase?
I have one image that I've created, and I've got another image that is sitting on my table, waiting for me to start painting it. And I just got a feeling, I don't know for sure, but I've got a feeling there might be at least one more. But Spirit will let me know.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I find in a lot of artists is there is a bit of um, there can be a depth of some challenge, angst, pain. You know, for a lot of artists, there is a creation out of that painful experiences in life. For you, what are some of the challenges that you have gone through that now have either influenced or informed the work that you're doing?
Um, wow, you're asking me to get pretty personal here. Definitely some things, and probably everybody has this somewhere. Definitely some things around self worth, um, feeling like you're a fraud. Is this really what you're supposed to be doing? Still, always, I'm second guessing. Is this what you're supposed to be doing? Are you sure you're on the right path? Making sure that I'm staying tuned in, turned on that way. For a while, I had some problems earlier in my life with some things around addiction, substances, and other things. So, really playing that out. What else? Had a pretty bad divorce at one point, and that really threw me for a loop, and really working through that, recovering from that, and just I think understanding what this is all about. And it's going to be a different answer for every different person. But once again, I believe that we find the universal within the particular, and so my particular experience, I believe, can be universalized that others can relate to it. Maybe not exactly, but definitely in an overarching way. So those are the things I kind of work with. And then just things come up in life, whether it's finances, whether it's other things, whether it's making sure that I've had some health challenges. I got COVID really bad and was really sick for a long time, dealing with some long COVID stuff and working through that and getting to a point where I felt like I could be safe and trust my body again. That's been a big thing over the last couple of years and dealing with that. So, I mean, life just life, and we have to kind of work with Spirit to navigate through. So, like
Hmm.
I said, I'm often working out my own stuff visually, and other people get to hopefully relate to it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But
What are the ways that people can purchase your work, whether it's online or in person? How does that part of your because I know you're not just creating to create, you are seeking to get this out into people's hands and homes. How is that possible, and how do you even feel about that part of the process of being an artist?
I feel good about it. It took me a while, but I got there. I don't have any image that I'm specifically attached to. All of my images are for sale, and all of my images are available in print from as small as 4 by 5 up to 40 by 70, even larger, depending on which image it is. So they're scanned pretty well, high DPI, very high DPI. So you can order those directly off my website at any size you want with all the bells and whistles. You can order it so that you can take it out of the package and put it on the wall without depending on how much you want to spend. If you want to actually purchase an original image, you probably need to email me directly, but you can look at it on my website and decide which one you might be interested in. And then you can email me directly and we can talk about that. I'm working on my second book. Wrote and self published my first book. And my scratchboard series is the openers for each chapter on that book. And now my chakra series is going to be the openers for this next book, which is going to be on the chakras. It should be coming out hopefully by end of February. So you can order those. Those will be available on my website. The books are available on the website. And yeah, I mean, no, this is a business. I'm a business person. I'm a spiritual business person, but this is a business. And this is what I do. And hopefully, I'm not quite doing it completely full time yet, but that is the goal. And if anybody wants to help me with that, I'm more than happy to work with you. And I'm also available to do some speaking if you want to talk about art, creativity, other things like that. I don't do paint parties and that type of stuff, but speaking, if you want to collaborate on some research, you have some ideas about some things related to anything you're doing and how art or creativity could go in with that, open for that. Um, I was a pastor for 26 years, so I have no problem with public speaking. If you need somebody to talk about something, I can do all kinds of things. Just let me know. We can, send me an email, private confidential email. We can, think it through.
I know you live in Northern California. Do you do pop-up events there as well to sell your work or display your work, or do you do anything locally?
Yes, I'm constantly showing. I've got two different pieces and two different shows right now. I've got two major shows coming up. One called the Superfine, which is going to be in the Fort Mason Center in San Francisco. It's going to be a very big show. Probably about 15 to 30,000 people will be coming through there. I've got a wall there that I'll be set up. Also, another one called the Startup Art Fair in San Francisco coming up in April, and that will be they rent out a whole hotel, and each artist gets a room to kind of put their stuff up, and people just walk around. I think that's a really cool idea. It's my first year in that one, so I'm looking forward to that. It should be fun. Um, and yeah, a couple other shows. I've got a solo show that I'm probably going to be having in the summer over in San Rafael. So I've got things going on, still showing my work. So if something's not available, that's why it's in the show. If you ask me about something that's not available, but as soon as it becomes available, I can send it to you. So
I want to ask your advice for a couple different people. So, the first person that I want to hear your encouragement and advice for is someone who is an artist and they're trying to integrate their spirituality into the process. Like they're trying to find ways to express it in a more, I guess, integrated way. What encouragement would you give to them?
I would say be intentional about your process. Really break it down and think about your creative process and be intentional about how you go about that. This doesn't happen. I mean, it can happen by accident, but you want to be intentional. That's what I try to do and be intentional about integrating spirit into every aspect of your process. And that may look different for each individual person. I found a way through experimentation that worked for me, but it took me about 2 or 3 years really to get a good rhythm on this is how it works for me. So just be intentional and really think it through and break it down. Um, and once you begin to do that, the rest of it'll work itself out. It'll work itself out.
Hmm. Okay, so the next person that I want to hear your thoughts or encouragement for is someone who's getting started as an artist and they're nervous about that shift to making it available to the public, whether to show it, to sell it. How would you encourage those individuals?
I would say let go, hone your craft, learn about the business aspect of being an artist. Oftentimes they don't teach enough about that even to this day in a lot of art schools if you're formally trained. If you're not, still you need to learn about the business side of being an artist and remember that this is your profession. You are a professional. Conduct yourself as such. Be on time. Artists have a lot of bad reputations for not being on time and not doing other things. And no, be a professional, and people will appreciate it because they will want to work with you. If you're not a professional, people won't want to work with you. So you want to establish yourself as a professional and let go. I know a lot of things that we create, we're very invested in, but let go. You never know how that's going to speak to somebody. Allow spirit to work with that and let go. Once you put it out there, like I said, it should take on a life of its own, and you should be okay with that as long as it's not in something turns into something very negative. Um, Let it be what it is, and you deserve it. It took me a long time to figure out you deserve it. Yes, this is personal, but you deserve it. And you're worthy. Whether you think you are or not, you are. And that may take some time to get to, but you will get there if you keep pushing.
Last question. What do you want your lasting impact to be on both the art community and the field of theology?
I hope that posthumously somebody will look at my stuff and say, you know what, this guy was on to something. I really like his approach. It's probably not going to happen in my lifetime. That's okay. I don't really fit with what I'm doing into the traditional art world, and I'm well aware of that, and I'm okay with that. It took me a while because of my formal training to get past that, but that's not my venue. That's not where this is going to happen, at least not yet. Humanity is evolving. We're evolving. I think at some point there will be a space for me, but it's probably not going to be at 56. It's probably not going to be while I'm still around. But I hope at some point people begin to see my images and look at that and look at some of the things I've written and say, you know what, he's right. He's on to something. How can we take this further and work with and carry the torch? I think what I'm doing is very unique. A lot of other people are doing spiritually themed work, but to me, it seems more psychedelic. A lot of people are experimenting with shrooms and other substances to create. Um, I I wanted something I felt like was more relatable. Um, and so that's what I'm trying to do. So it's a very individual niche, and I'm okay with that. And yeah, you have to get okay with that.
All right, where can people follow you on social media, and where can they buy your art?
You can follow me on Twitter at DP Art and Theo. You can follow me on Instagram at Damon A. Powell. You can follow me on Facebook at Damon Powell, artist and theologian. If you start typing it in, it will come up. My Facebook page. If you want to buy my art, you can view it on damonpowell.com and then send me a confidential email if you're actually interested in buying an original. If you just want to print, you can order right there off the website. If you live locally, you might want to contact me about the print because I can get it to you faster through some of my local sources as opposed to the sources that I use on the website. And sign up for my blog, sign up for my email list so that I can let you know if you're local where I'm showing, when I'm going to be showing certain things. I do open studios probably once or twice a year. So if you're local, you can come by and check out the open studios to see everything, the originals. So that's how you can reach me. Info at damonpowell.com is my email.
Info at damonpowell.com. Great. We'll have all that, of course, in the show notes. If you're listening on your phone, you can swipe up and find that. And we'll embed images on the transcription from our conversation. But of course, you can check them all out at damonpowell.com. Damon, so great to be with you. I just love your heart, your energy, one of the things that comes through for you, and I just feel like I'm supposed to mirror this back to you, is that in our conversation, there seems to be such a groundedness and a comfort with who you are, what you're doing, and your vision that you are not seeking to prove or strive or get someone's attention, but you're seeking to be a vessel of service. And that if people resonate with that, great. If they don't, the desire is for them to cause them to reflect on something. And so that sense of groundedness that you have, and that you're not trying to prove anything but just be a vessel of service, it just feels so good. Just feels great. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.